Rev it up and welcome to Cars Yeah, show number 2499. Today we're going to go back to the golden age of Group C and IMSA GTP racing and talk about a very special factory Jaguar program with Tom Walkinshaw Racing. This is going to be fun, so buckle up and be prepared to be inspired.
This is Cars Yeah, where you'll enjoy interviews with inspiring automotive enthusiasts. Mark Green is here to provide you with a fuel injection of automotive inspiration. So get in, sit down, buckle up, and get ready for a wild ride here on Cars Yeah.
Hello, inspiring automotive enthusiasts, and welcome to Cars Yeah. Today I'm in beautiful Sonoma, California, with a very special guest by the name of Neil Smith. Neil, welcome to Cars Yeah. Do you have any gear, and are you ready to release the clutch?
I am ready.
All right, we'll have some fun today. Now, before we get started and we get into some really cool history about racing and Jaguar, what's one little thing that maybe people don't know about Neil Smith?
Well, my background actually is in music. I have a music degree, and these days it manifests itself. I am in a 90s alternative rock tribute band.
Whoa. And what do you do in that band?
I play guitar and I do a little bit of singing, but we've been doing it for a long time, and it's a heck of a lot of fun.
90s, very cool. Well, you see in the wall behind me a Strat hanging on the wall, and
I do.
A few other guitars on the other side here from my youth. I don't play it as much as I should. I really need to pick those up and pluck them once in a while. But it's interesting how many people I've had in the show that are into music. It's a lot of people. Yeah. So some correlation between cars, music, cool things.
I think so. Yeah. Just like the curves, the flow of a electric guitar and a sports car. I definitely see the parallels there.
Well, and you'll love this one because this is a limited edition Strat that is called a hot rod model.
Oh, yeah.
It's metallic red, and the pick guard is engine-turned aluminum in black.
Wow.
Kind of fun.
Yes.
Kind of neat. All right. So here we go. Neil Smith, like many kids, got his love of motorsports from his father and from his earliest years. His passion for the sport was fueled by weekends, spectating at English racetracks, and there's where that accent comes from, and watching the Formula One on television. But it was sports car racing that really caught his imagination. Initially the Group C, and later after a move to the USA with IMSA. Trips to Le Mans 24 added to the experience, and in the 2000s, his hobby of writing a blog about racing turned into an actual reporting on the American Le Mans Series and Grand Am for the predecessor of SportsCar365.com. After building a career in tech industry and playing the guitar a little bit in a band, Neil returned to writing in 2018, beginning work on his debut title, which we're going to talk about today, On The Prowl, the definitive history of the Walkinshaw Jaguar sports car team, uncovering the fascinating stories, the anecdotes, and intrigue from those who were there. The book's published by our good friends at David Bull Publishing. We'll be back in just a moment, but first a word from our sponsors, so give them a little love. Buckle up. We'll be right back. Cars Yeah is proud to support our veterans, which is why I've teamed up with our nonprofit partner, TechForce Foundation, through its Veterans at Work Military Transition Campaign. The tech shortage is very real, and our country needs skilled, qualified techs to keep our cars, trucks, airplanes, and fleets rolling. When so many vets build their skills in maintaining and servicing vehicles when deployed, TechForce helps transition those skills to jobs as professional technicians when they come home. Learn more about TechForce Foundation and its Veterans at Work Military Transition Fund at techforce.org today. For several years now, you've heard me talk about Linkage Magazine. I've been a subscriber since the start. Their talented and creative team brings you a spectacular publication and website that shares the automotive passion from a worldwide perspective. Linkage is about driving, restoring, collecting, and first-hand experience at collector car auctions and more. They bring you real-world values plus rational, experienced opinions on the current markets. They cover the automotive world and the people who share our passions. And Linkage Magazine has grown, mailing you 6 issues annually. Join me on this journey with Linkage. They're geared for the automotive life. You can subscribe at linkagemag.com. Are you ready to take charge of your financial future? Then let me introduce you to Capitalize Your Finances. It's an online course designed to empower you with the knowledge and tools for mastering your money. This course will help you lay out the ins and outs of budgeting, the importance of emergency funds, investing strategies, and how to plan for a secure retirement. All this presented by financial planner Chris Paniotu. Chris has developed this course to help you effectively navigate your world of finance with confidence. Stop stressing about money and start taking control. Enroll in Capitalize Your Finance online course today and pave your way to financial success. To learn more, go to capitalizepodcast.com/courses, or better yet, go to the Cars Yeah website, show notes page for today's show, and click on the link under Capitalize Your Finances. You'll be glad you did. Do it today. All right, we are back. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit. We learned about your artisticness with the music, the singing and guitar playing, but I wanted to learn a little bit about background for you of what got you to this point of writing this book. And then we're going to take a little deeper dive into this book because it's quite, well, as all David Bull books are, they're massive. You know, they go in depth, but you've got an extra special touch with a lot of people there. What brought you to this point in your life?
Well, you covered the high level of the love of motorsport that I had from the very beginning. The first Group C race that I went to was at Brands Hatch in 1985. I was 9 years old. And it happened to be the first time that the new Jaguar Group C cars had been racing in the United Kingdom. So that's a really strong memory for me. And then I continued to go to races with my dad, of course, Silverstone, Donington, Brands Hatch, all of that. And then we moved to the US in the 90s. And then I was close to Laguna Seca and Sears Point. Wonderful tracks, very evocative, long history with sports car racing. And I found myself also getting more involved with the historic scene as well, going to the Monterey Historics. You know, a major great memory I have with my dad again. It was at the Laguna Seca Historics in 1994. The featured mark was Ferrari, and we would just watch Ferrari after Ferrari after Ferrari come by on the track, and it was just a wonderful thing. And then later on, when I started doing the blog, I had a friend reach out who was running a website called thepaddock.net, and he was really trying to make a go of it. And he asked me if I would be interested in covering some Japanese GT racing, which is very, very difficult to do from California. There wasn't much on the internet, but I signed up for the media site of the Japanese GT Championship and started getting all the race reports. And from that, ended up working with him, John Dagis. He's now the editor of Sports Car 365, one of the top sports car websites out there. He invited me to do some work on ALMS and Grand Am. So I wrote some race reports for that. And then over time, visiting more and more races, the writing kind of fell by the wayside a little bit. And then in 2018, I went down the typical internet rabbit hole. I think many of us have been there. Oftentimes it's with Wikipedia. The site of choice for me was a site called racingsportscars.com. And it's basically a collection of photos of all the different cars that raced in all the different races since the 50s and even before. And it has things like the serial numbers of the chassis numbers of the cars that raced. And so you can actually follow the histories of very specific chassis. And I was looking at a lot of the Group C cars, and I started looking at some of the Jaguars, and it was confusing to me. There seemed to be so many different kinds of Jaguar Group C cars, and what engines did they have, and which ones were the winners and which ones won at Le Mans. And I went down a complete rabbit hole. And before long, I found myself just kind of writing down some notes on all these different cars. And those notes turned into this idea. I was like, well, each of these cars is kind of like a character in a story. Wouldn't it be great if we had like a chassis by chassis history and we'd learn a little bit about each one of these? So I started doing that. And then before long, I realized actually there's a whole other story behind this. There's the story of Tom Walkinshaw racing and Tom himself. There's the story of Jaguar itself. And I started reading about the history of Jaguar, and I thought, oh my goodness, this is quite the soap opera.
Oh, yeah.
And I started to put it all together, and I wrote an introduction just talking about the 1,000 kilometers of Silverstone in 1988, which was a particularly strong memory for me. And then I thought, I'll just write the first chapter. And I decided the first chapter would be about Jaguar falling into the British Leyland, Austin Rover, that whole conglomerate.
Yeah.
I got to the end of the first chapter and I thought, oh, I'll keep going. And before long, I was neck deep in this thing. And it took 6 years, but we got there eventually. And last year, I took a sabbatical from work, a month to really finish the thing up, and successfully did that. And during that process, that's how I ended up talking to the fantastic folks at Bull Publishing. So it's all worked out quite well.
Be careful when you stick your toe in that rabbit hole, right?
I know. Yes.
Look where you end up. Oh my gosh.
Yes, it's a dangerous thing. Anybody who ever finds themselves on racingsportscards.com is at risk of exactly my affliction.
Well, it's funny, in our pre-show talk, we were talking about Mike Dale, who was a guest a few weeks ago on Cars, and his history with Jaguar. And I think back to when I lived in I grew up in Southern California, going to the Del Mar Grand Prix with those Group C cars, IMSA GTP, and I mean, watching those things run on a very tight, wild, crazy course, which I could hear from my house when they were practicing, and got to go over there and enjoy that. I got my wife really excited about racing. She never really thought about it until she went to a live race, and this is fun. Well, wait till you go to Daytona or Laguna Seca or, some of these other tracks, or end up in Europe at Spa or any of these other places and watch these cars go by. But I wanted to talk about this book because our good friends at Bull Publishing Mariah got us together, and she's brought several great guests, and I was friends with her brother way back in the day. Met him when he was just almost kind of starting out. So his books are incredible and they go so deep. So this Group C IMSA GTP era of racing was really, and I called it the golden age of racing, because there were very few teams that raced the level of success that Tom Walkinshaw's racing did. And then when you combine the Jaguar to it and the ups and downs of Jaguar, and you think, how did they pull this off? So let's start by talking a little bit about Tom and what you learned about him, because he really was one of those guys that was either really highly acclaimed or people really didn't like him very much because of some of the things that, but that's racing. I mean, racing is love-hate in many, many ways. So tell us a little bit about Tom Walkinshaw.
Yeah, it's racing, but it's also business as well. And a lot of what made Tom Walkinshaw who he was this very fierce sense of driving for business success. He was the son of a farmer in Scotland, and eventually found his way into motorsport, initially as a driver. And that drive that he had, no pun intended, to be successful at whatever he did, I think is what carried him through everything that followed. He eventually became a team owner and started doing touring car racing, then landed factory deals with Mazda and then with Audi, and then finally with Jaguar. And he had a very shrewd approach to the Jaguar thing. He actually went and talked to John Egan, who was the fairly newly installed head of Jaguar. And they cooked up a scheme as to how to make this program work, because it was very early on in Jaguar's kind of resurgence. They didn't want to be associated with a losing program. And Tom said, that's fine. I also don't want to be associated with a program that doesn't make any money. So between them, they said, well, if you win, you're going to get £30,000. If you come second, you get 20,000, and third, you get 10,000. So Walkinshaw, who was so sure that he would be successful, he accepted that deal, and it ended up being quite an expensive deal for Jaguar. But on the flip side, they were immediately able to turn around and start talking about victory on the racetrack, and that was in 1982. So that was the beginning of that the relationship that Tom had with Jaguar. And then from that point on, the touring car program continued to have great success. They won the 24 Hours of Spa. They won the European Touring Car Championship. And then when Jaguar were ready to go back to Le Mans, after initially doing it with the US team, Group 44, under Bob Tullius, they then also decided to have a parallel program with Tom. And ultimately, it was Tom's drive for success and bringing such incredible talent to his team that meant that they were the team that ultimately became the sole factory team.
Yeah, it's a pretty amazing story. And as deep as you got into this, I understand you got contributions from some very famous drivers, Derek Warwick, Davy Jones, Andy Wallace. Yeah. I mean, Price Cobb. These are names that drum up all sorts of thoughts in my mind going back to that era and time. What was it like talking to people that were there, driving, working in the teams? Must have been amazing.
It was incredible. As a lifelong motorsport fan, to then suddenly find yourself almost you're participating in the industry to a certain extent, and to have a conversation with effectively peers now, it was very disarming, but to every single one of them was so gracious, so welcoming, and so friendly, and just giving of their time. I mean, I talked with Price Cobb for like 2.5 hours.
Oh my gosh.
It was extraordinary. I talked with Davey for a long time as well, and then eventually he lives about 4 hours from me. I ended up going up to his house. He has a huge number of these big albums that his dad kept with newspaper cuttings and photographs that he took, photographs that other people took. And I spent the day just going through all of these albums, and had lunch with Davey and his lovely wife, and they were just so welcoming, so gracious. And then to get to talk to Derek Warwick and Eddie Cheever, Formula One heroes from the 80s.
Right.
It was extraordinary. The other thing that was really a lot of fun with this is hearing multiple people talking about the same event, but having different perspectives on how it had played out. And so there's a few places in the book where I say, so-and-so said this happened. And then I also say, but so-and-so said it happened totally differently, and hearing those kinds of things is a lot of fun.
How fun. I mean, when you find yourself in those positions, and I've done it with Cars Yeah! In my previous career, you end up sitting with people. I got to spend a day with the photographer Jesse Alexander at his home on the beach, and going through photographs and listening to him talk about each photograph he was pulling. Oh, I forgotten about this one. And you just kind of sit there and think, how did I get here? This is so incredible.
Yeah.
To hear it from the horse's mouth, right?
Yeah. And the answer to how did I get there is, it was kind of a chain reaction. And it started with David Brabham. So I just sent a cold email to David's website, and I got a reply back from his assistant, and she arranged for me to speak with David. And just as I was finishing up a fantastic conversation with him, I said, is there anyone else that you think you could connect me with? He said, I'll send some emails to some people I know. And then before long, Derek Warwick was reaching out to me. And then I asked Derek the same question. Is there anyone else that you can connect me to?
Right.
And it just it kind of spiraled. And I ended up talking to nearly everybody that I wanted to talk to. There were a couple of notable exceptions, but just for various reasons, scheduling and the like. But for the most part, nearly all of the figures involved in this who were of any kind of significance and who are obviously still alive, I was able to get a conversation with.
When you think about their success, and after talking with all these people, why were they successful? What was it, the combination of the people, or was it all leadership from Tom top down? Or
Tom definitely was one of those leaders who knew how to put together a really successful team. And a lot of the people who worked for Tom Walkinshaw Racing back in the day at maybe lower levels are now at very high levels in motorsport. There's I think of mechanic Pete Hodgkinson, who he was literally just mechanic back in the day with TWR, and now I think he's in charge of build engineering for the Mercedes AMG Petronas Formula One team. And he's just one example. There's many of those really great mechanics from back in the day have now gone on to much greater things. And then the designer of the Group C car, Tony Southgate, came to Tom with a really great resume, but then also went on to work for the Toyota Group C team and various other endeavors after that. So he definitely had an eye for people who had a lot of potential. He had an eye for people who already had demonstrated success, and he wanted to surround himself with those kinds of people. And it worked really, really well for him until it didn't. And, the final couple of chapters of the book are about what happened with TWR after the sports car program was over. And it really was quite tumultuous for that whole company. And I talked to people who were with him through the ups and also through the downs, and to hear their experiences of both of those sides of the experience was fascinating.
Oh, no doubt. I wanted to mention, because The books at Bold Publishing are they're lifetime keeper type books. I mean, I've got almost all of them on my shelf. You got to have a big sturdy shelf to hold all these books up because
Yeah.
they weigh a ton. That's why I hope I never have to move, because hauling all those to the next place is going to be tough. But one of the many people on these teams, because often the author, of course, gets the rightful notoriety, but it's a team that puts this whole thing together. And I want to mention Jody Ellis. She designed the book. She's also a gearhead, and she also works, I believe, for Dalton Watson. Fine books.
Yes. Yeah.
Can you talk about Jody a little bit? Because that collaboration between the author and the person who puts the visual aspects down, I think is really important, whether a book comes off great or okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Jody, she is a wizard. I don't even know where to start with talking about her incredible design skills, but also I think her special sauce is that she really seeks to understand what's inside the author's mind and what the author's vision is like. I think I have a reasonably good feel for the aesthetics of books like this. And we had a lot of fun, like looking at existing books, and I would send her a bunch of ideas and say, hey, I like this thing from this book, and I like this other thing from this other book. And she would take that away and she would turn it into something that she thought would work. And of course, like, this is the first book I've published, so there's limitations maybe that I'm not aware of, or commercial considerations and all of that. And she was very, very good about basically schooling me on how these books are put together. So, and the other thing is, as you say, she's a gearhead. She loves cars. She loves racing. And so she had a real vested interest and a passion in ensuring that the story came to life as much as it did. And I can't wait for people to see this book, because aesthetically, it's so cool. The colors that she's picked, the little design elements that are in there, they're really kind of hip, really modern looking. The font that we ended up choosing, like, everything is just like, I couldn't ask for a better possible outcome.
Well, you said something important. First, seeking to understand and speaking to be understood. Sounds like that's what she does. And that's one of Stephen Covey's 7 habits, number 5,
Right.
number 5, I think. So, yeah, so she does it right. Well, I want to make sure she got some accolades here.
Absolutely.
I like to talk a little bit about inspirations and mentors in people's lives. And I'd like to tie this back to the book, if I may. Yeah. It may be the obvious, Tom here, as a great mentor to you or inspiration to you for this book. And if it is going to be him, maybe what it is about him, or was there somebody else?
Well, Tom, my day job, I work in the tech industry, and I lead a fairly large team of highly technical people, which is a great experience to be doing. So leadership is something that I deal with it on a daily basis. Tom's past, I can draw a lot of inspiration from a lot of the things that he did, and surrounding yourself with top tier talent was definitely a big thing that I saw in what he did. Having a passion for it as well. Those two things are definitely inspirational. Some of the downsides of Tom's personality, which I talk about in the book, I think it's only right that the reader walks away from this seeing both sides of Tom. That he was definitely fast and loose with the rules. He was an extremely hard-nosed business person in a way that maybe wasn't to his advantage in some deals. He was difficult to work with for some people. His management style did not gel with some people, and he maybe lost some really good talent as a result of that. Certainly, you can learn as much from Tom about what not to do as you can about what you should do. The one mentor that I want to call out that is related to the book, though, is John Nikas, who's been on your show.
Oh, John, yeah.
a couple of times. So it was John, actually, that was my first connection with David Bull Publishing. And it was through another author, a guy named John Saltonstall, who put out a fantastic Jackie Ickx Race by Race book.
He's also been on this show many times.
Yeah. And he did one on Niki Lauda a few years ago as well. So I reached out to John just because I'd heard him on another podcast. And I said, hey, you transitioned from a career in banking to being a really well-respected author. How did you do it? And so we had a great conversation. He said, you should talk to my friend John Nikas, who's really into a lot of the British sports car stuff. And I think he's on the west coast of the US, so you'd be in the same time zone. So I did. We talked a little bit. John was really interested. I sent him a couple of chapters, and he was really excited about what he saw. And he said, look, I want to help you out. I want to see what we can do with this book. Maybe we'll have Bull take a look at it. And he has been just outstanding through the whole process. And he's a very big-hearted guy anyway. I know that when he was on your show, he was talking about the work that he did driving his old sports cars to see terminally ill children and just giving them some joy of being in those cars. Like, that speaks to John's character a lot. So I feel kind of honored that he said, look, I want to help you out as much as possible. So really, when it comes to the most important mentor for this process, it's John Nikas for sure.
Well, shout out to him. And he always reminds me that he's the only guest I've had that has made me cry. On cars, out of over 25.
I remember it.
100 people. Yeah, that was a heartbreaker. It was a tough time for me. I'd lost my dad recently, so that added to it, I believe. But John is amazing, and he just seems to know everybody. And I've known him for a long time. I run into him during Car Week every year, and every once in a while he comes up here to the Northwest and visits, and we get together for a meal. So that's great that he's in your life as well. And of course, Saltonstall, there's another one. 2 awesome books for a guy who came from another career set and wrote some amazing books about some amazing drivers. It's pretty cool. So I love it. So challenges, I always ask my guests about challenges. Let's tie this back to this transition to writing, because again, it's a very different type of career path than IT. I've got family members in IT. My kids are all in that field. What was the biggest challenge for you in writing this book?
Yes. I think it really came down to a matter of time and prioritization. I definitely wanted to be able to carve out time to get the book done. But of course, I have a family and I want to spend time with them and do things with them. And so there's only so much that you can do. And when you are just kind of gradually writing the book, it's fairly easy to kind of prioritize. You can find an hour here, you can find an hour there. Once you get to the actual publication point, all of a sudden, a lot of things need to happen very, very quickly.
It's real, doesn't it?
it does, yeah. And probably the biggest challenge, I think, was I came to John and Bull with a very large manuscript, and that was it. And my original intention for this book was, I love narrative nonfiction. I love reading John Krakauer, Into the Wild and Into Thin Air. I love reading Michael Lewis, Moneyball and The Big Short, those kinds of books. And so when I wrote this book, I wrote it with the intention that this would be a narrative nonfiction. It would be something that someone could throw in their suitcase, they could take on the beach, and they could read on the beach, because it was such an interesting story. And Tom Walkinshaw is such a big character. You could hang this in a narrative nonfiction kind of framework. And it was only after speaking with John and determining that Bull were going to put this out, he's like, this is going to be a big book with lots of pictures. And I thought, oh, okay, so where do we get the pictures? And, do we just go to a commercial library and pay them, I don't know, $10 a picture or something? We need 600 pictures. It's going to cost us $6,000 or what have you. No. That's not how it goes at all. Like, you have a limited budget, and you do want to get some stuff from commercial libraries, but those are the photos that potentially everyone can get their hands on. You need to find the photos that are a little bit more rare. And luckily, I was able to connect with a couple of really, actually, I'd say 3 or 4 photographers were really key to this project. But pulling all that together, finding the photographers, getting clearances, getting the photos in the right format, the right resolution, getting them color corrected. Jody does all the color correction, but making sure that they were going to look good in print. That was an enormous lift. And then, of course, you have to write captions for them as well. And we didn't have a lot of time to do it. So that was a situation where I would just work every evening. We'd have dinner, and my wife would go off to bed eventually, and I would just keep sitting there working on photos. Yeah, it was a grind. We got there in the end. So that was probably the biggest challenge, I would say.
Oh gosh, can't even imagine. Yeah, I understand. So is there going to be another book when you look ahead to your bucket list?
It's funny you should mention that. So I do have another project that I'm working on, and actually it's with John. He's working on another Jaguar related project. So I'm helping out a little bit on that. And then I have ideas for a couple of other books. It's going to come down to time and prioritization. But, once you've got the first book out there, I feel like that at least gives you some credibility, and you can, in theory, go to other publishers in the future when the time is right and say, hey, I've got this idea, I've got that idea, and we'll see where it goes.
Well, after this monster, you got plenty of creds here, buddy, so you don't think you need to worry too much about that. I like to ask about a special vehicle in my guest's life, but again, I'm going to tie this back to this racing and Jaguar. Was there one car? I think there were, 30-something of those race cars built?
Yeah.
Something like that, 32? Am I right on that number?
There were 32. Yeah. Well, it's and that's definitely part of the chassis history section at the end of the book, which is definitely there for all of the nerds like me who want to know about every single chassis.
But if there's one, I want you to pick one car that just tugs at your heart.
One of those.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be easy to pick out the Chassis 488, which is the car that won Le Mans in 1988. So, that was a classic. But actually, that was a badly behaved car that didn't finish a single race until it finished Le Mans in first position. I actually think the car that won Le Mans in 1990, Chassis 288, is in some ways is a more interesting vehicle because it started out as an IMSA car. So it ran all of the IMSA season in 1988. It ran most of the IMSA season in 1989 as well. And it actually won the Daytona 24 Hours in 1988. So the first race for Jaguar in IMSA under Tom Walkinshaw got the win. And that was the car that won. And then it was updated, repurposed. And in 1990, it was brought to Le Mans. And it was run primarily by the IMSA team, by Tony Dow. And they did all kinds of sneaky stuff in order to get that win. Sneaky in a good way, because the British side of TWR was trying to get them to conform and do everything as they wanted it done. And the American side was like, no, we want to do different anti-roll bars. We want to do different tires. We want to do different kinds of brake calipers. And so over the course of the week leading up to Le Mans, after every practice, they would switch out one thing here, one thing there. So that no one on the British side would actually notice what had happened. And so by the time the race started, the car was quite different, and different enough that it was able to perform better than the other three cars, and it ended up taking the win.
Wow.
And there's a fascinating story about how Martin Brundle ended up on the driving team in the middle of the night too. So there's a lot around that car that's really fascinating. And we know quite a lot about its history since then. And I had a chance to speak with Henry Perman, who's one of the foremost collectors of these Jaguar XJR prototypes. And Henry's owned that car at one point too. And so we talked a lot about it as well in while researching the book. So yeah, it's a pretty great car.
This racing looks so simple as a viewer of racing, but there's so much complexity behind it. Yeah. I mean, it's just so deep in alligators, as they say. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to crawl into your skull a little bit here, Neil, play car psychologist. If you were manifest, reincarnated as a vehicle, what would you be and why?
Well, I've had this conversation with my wife, and we ended up on the same car.
Wow. Okay, that's a surprise.
Yeah, in some ways it's such a boring answer. And the car we ended up with was an Audi S4.
Okay, so why is that?
Yeah, a very good question. Why is that? I've actually owned two of them in the past.
Okay.
They're not flashy, nor am I. They are quite technical. I kind of feel like I'm fairly technical.
I think so.
But under the skin, they can do a lot of stuff. Like, they're four-wheel drive, so they're pretty good if you take them onto gravel roads. They'll do great on the racetrack because they're nice and powerful, have good handling. Audi likes everything to be buttoned up just so, and they have an eye for detail. And for anyone who gets their hands on this book, they'll see that maybe Neil has a bit of an eye for detail, or might be considered to be a little bit OCD, which I think is sometimes important when you're putting a book together like this. Yeah. So I think all of those things, they translate over to my personality a little bit. It's not the flashiest car. It's probably not the most unusual answer you've had for a question like this. But the fact that both my wife and I ended up with the same answer kind of leads me to believe it's probably the right answer.
Well, I like that. That must be why I like you as I've gotten to know you today, because I love those cars. The S4s are awesome. So
They
there
are.
you go. That makes sense. Well, obviously, I always ask about a great book, and today's book, of course, is On The Prowl. Nice title. The Definitive History of the Walkinshaw Jaguar Sports Car Team, of course, by our guest today, Neil Smith, and I'll put a link to that to the Bull Publishing website where you can get your hands on it because it's going to be printed here this month, July. So
it's
be available.
It's with printers right now. So yeah, it's coming out very soon.
Very cool. I love it. So let's go on the ultimate drive here today. I'd like to have another bit of enabling fun with my guests. I'm going to put any vehicle in your driveway. Now, if you want to go on a drive on a racetrack in one of these old GTP cars, IMSA cars, a Jaguar, I'll put it in your driveway. I'll put it in the track, any track, by the way. So what does the ultimate drive look like for a guy like you?
Well, considering that I wrote about racing on the track, my ultimate drive actually probably wouldn't be on the track.
Okay.
It wouldn't be with somebody who's known for their track antics, although they did do a little bit of racing on the track. So I would have a passenger of Colin McRae sitting next to me.
Okay.
And there's actually a little bit of a tie-in with my daughter here too. So her middle name is McRae.
Oh, wow.
We always felt like Colin McRae, his character, he was someone who gave 100% to everything. He was really outgoing. His driving style was always spectacular. Yours knew where you stood with him. He could be a bit salty every now and then, but he was a family man, cared deeply about his family. And so there was a lot about him that resonated with me and my wife because she has an interest in rallying as well. So Colin would be in the passenger seat, and we'd actually be in Tuscany as well, the roads in central Tuscany.
Nice.
Again, there's a little bit of a tie-in with my daughter. Her first name is Poppiano. She's named after a small village in Tuscany.
Oh, wow.
With a castle there where they took the art from Florence and stored it there during World War II so that it wouldn't get damaged. So we named her Poppy, but her full name's Poppiano. So Colin and I, we'd be driving around the roads in Tuscany. And of course, if you're in Italy, you're with a rally driver. I love homologation specials like BMW E30 M3 and Mitsubishi Evo. But for this, it would have to be a Lancia Delta Integrale. And probably the Evo version with the really wide front fenders.
Nice.
That car is just fantastic.
Nice story. Nice picture you put together there, Wordsmith. I like that. Very good. Very good. Well, before I let you go today, I'd love for you to share maybe some parting words of inspiration, maybe tying back to the book. And by the way, congratulations. What a great first book. Holy cow. You set the bar very high for yourself. That's for sure. But could you leave us with some parting words of inspiration or advice?
Yeah, I have a couple. So the first is, this was the perfect example of indulging a passion. And often I found that the difference between what you would consider to be an amateur and an expert is not necessarily talent, it's time. And I found the same with my music career as well. I just spent a lot of time early on learning how to play. And then obviously with this book, it just took an awful lot of time. And at the end of it, you keep spending time on these things, you'll get better and better at them. And so I encourage people to really indulge their passions as much as they can. And then also related to time, getting this across the finish line. If someone had sat me down 6 years ago and said, you need to write 530 pages on Jaguar's Group C and GTP programs, I'd be like, no way, I just can't do it. It's too much. But if someone says to you, hey, can you write a chapter about Jaguar? Like, all right, I can write a chapter. You get to the end of a chapter. Could you write another one? And before long, if that keeps happening, you find yourself with 530 pages. So I always had in my mind as I was writing this, how do you eat an elephant? Yeah. One bite at a time. Yep. And if ever there was an example of that, this is it. And I kept that in mind when we were talking about the challenges around getting images for the book. Same thing. I started with 0 images and I needed to get 650 of them. How do you get 650 images? Just one image at a time.
Yeah. Kind of what's that saying about a journey of 1,000 steps starts with one step.
Exactly.
So same thing. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I always love that one. Well, how can people learn more about you, and mostly how do they get their hands on a copy of this book?
They'll get the book at bullpublishing.com. I think it's on the front page or I think you click on books. And so you can pre-order it right now.
Okay.
So follow me. My Instagram is Cheers Governor. That's
Yes.
CheersGuvnor. Cheers Governor. And so, that's how I do most of my like putting things out there onto the internet. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Neil Aiden Smith is my LinkedIn handle.
All right. Very
Yeah.
cool. I'll put links to all of these on Neil's show notes page on the Cars Yeah website so you can follow him. Mostly, though, if you're an automotive and racing fan, this is a book that you need to have in your library. It will be in mine as soon as that publishing or printed version comes out, which is very quickly here. Another big shout out to Mariah Bull. She's been a past guest on the show as well. A key ingredient in Bull Publishing that put this book together and the magnificent team that they have. Neil, thanks for taking a pit stop with me today. And maybe someday we'll get together and do a little jam session. That will be fun. Until you and I talk again, I'll see you down the road. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us on today's ride here at Cars Yeah. Drive on over to carsyeah.com to find show notes and inspiring automotive fun. Download your free copy of Filler Up, a fun book filled with gorgeous photographs of fuel filler fun, including quotes from more inspiring automotive enthusiasts. Download your copy today, and we'll see you next time on Cars Yeah.